Today you're going to hear a true story, so absurd it feels like a lie. But relax, because here, the strange helps you fall asleep. Imagine Paris, on a spring morning, when the sunlight is still timid and golden, reflecting off the slate rooftops and the silent windows of old apartments. The air carries with it the fragrance of fresh bread, newly brewed coffee, and flowers discreetly escaping from the tiny windows of hidden gardens. The streets are quiet, footsteps echo only softly over the cobblestones, and the distant murmur of the Seine feels like a lullaby for the entire city. It is in this setting that the story of a woman begins, a woman many believed they knew, but whose true identity was a secret as deep as the waters of the river winding through Paris. She was tall, with blonde hair that seemed to capture the sunlight, turning every strand into a delicate thread of gold. Her eyes, green like an ancient emerald, carried a mysterious expression that left every observer simultaneously fascinated and unsettled. There was something about the way she walked, so light, so serene, that she seemed to float above the sidewalks, as though gravity itself had chosen to spare her. Paris, at that moment, was enchanted by her, even though no one could say for sure who she was, where she came from, or what she truly did. And perhaps it was precisely this absence of answers that made her story so irresistible. In the quiet morning cafes, while waiters wiped the tables with almost ritualistic movements, people spoke of her in hushed voices. "Did you see her last night?" Some would whisper, as if the air itself might carry the information farther than necessary. "She was at the ball, dancing with a man no one knows." Can you imagine? And no one could tell whether they were speaking about the same person, or if each was inventing their own version of who this mysterious woman was. The stories varied, yet there was a common thread. Everyone felt drawn to her, intrigued by the enigma that seemed to inhabit her body and her gestures. And yet, there was a subtle sense that something was out of place, a detail, almost imperceptible, that didn't quite fit. Perhaps it was the way she avoided speaking about herself, or how she answered questions with vague smiles that confused more than they clarified. The Parisians, used to bohemians, artists, and eccentric intellectuals, began to notice that this woman carried with her a secret that no rumor, no matter how elaborate, could reveal. And it is in this elegant silence, in that space between what is shown and what is hidden, that our story truly begins. As she walked through the streets of Montmartre, among artists painting their canvases and musicians tuning their violins, the mysterious blonde always seemed to be ahead of her time, always a step ahead of conversations, a step ahead of the curious glances that tried to decipher her. Every gesture was calculated, yet performed so naturally that no one suspected there was a meticulous construction of a life that didn't exist. The city, in its calm morning state, merely observed, unaware of the great plot unfolding between its alleys and squares. And that is exactly the feeling I want you to have now. The quiet enchantment of Paris, the calm air of morning, and the presence of someone who seems real but carries with her a secret almost impossible to grasp. Allow yourself to imagine every detail, every shadow, every light reflected in the old windows. For it is in this setting that the mysterious blonde begins weaving the first layer of her illusion. So, close your eyes for a moment, take a deep breath, and let the murmur of the city, the scent of coffee, and the soft glow of Paris seep into your mind. Imagine you are there, sitting on a stone bench, watching her walk by, feeling a mixture of curiosity and calm, with no rush to discover anything, simply absorbing the enchantment that this story will reveal, little by little. And as the city slowly awakens, you prepare to follow the steps of this woman who, without anyone noticing, would begin to deceive all of Paris with a life that was never real. And so, while Paris began to fill with the delicate sound of hurried footsteps and bells marking the hours with a rhythm almost poetic, she appeared. The first appearance of the mysterious blonde was not announced, nor expected. She was simply there, among the crowd that slowly filled the sidewalks, almost as if she had emerged from the very golden light filtering through the leaves of the quiet garden trees. The whole city, still half asleep, seemed not to notice her presence at first. But something in her delicate bearing, in her serene posture, drew the attention of those willing to slow their pace, even for a moment. It was an ordinary morning, yet the way she moved seemed to transform the everyday into a stage. The fabrics of her dress, light and flowing, followed each gesture as if they were an extension of her body, sketching shapes and shadows across the cobblestones. The sunlight fell on her hair, turning it almost liquid, and the reflections dancing on her pale skin seemed to tell silent stories. Stories no one could hear, but which everyone, somehow, understood. In that moment, even without words, Paris began to believe in something greater than routine. The sense that it was standing before someone unique, untouchable, and yet, paradoxically, visible to all. Some attentive Parisians noticed details that seemed trivial, but would later prove important. She carried no bag, no hat. Yet her movements held a natural elegance, almost ethereal. Her gaze, at times distant, at times curious, wandered through the city as though she knew every secret corner, every alley forgotten by time, every face that passed without noticing the enigma walking beside them. It was as if she held the power to alter the perception of the world simply by existing. And Paris, silent and distracted, was beginning to feel that subtle shift. The first witnesses who crossed her path would later say they felt a strange familiarity, even though they had never seen her before. It was as if the entire city knew this woman intimately, without her ever needing to introduce herself. The artists, ever attentive to subtleties, began sketching her silhouette in notebooks, trying to capture the movement of her hair, the lightness of her steps. Some musicians composed chords that tried, in their own way, to echo the sensation of watching her pass. Everything seemed to conspire to make the mysterious blonde more than a presence. She became an idea, an inspiration, a living mystery hovering above Paris. And yet, something remained untouched, a detail few would notice at first. She spoke very little, and when she did, her words were soft, chosen with precision, as though each syllable were part of a secret ritual. Even when she smiled, there was an air of inaccessibility, as if that gesture had been rehearsed only to be seen, never to reveal what she truly thought or felt. The city, enchanted, could only admire her, and that silent admiration began to weave the first layer of the illusion she would build. The illusion that everything Paris saw was real, and yet, nothing was true. As she walked through cafes and squares, observed by people who watched her with curiosity, the mysterious blonde created, without even noticing, an aura of untouchability. No gesture seemed accidental, and yet none seemed forced. Everything unfolded in a soft, almost hypnotic cadence that left those who observed her without urgency, without the need to understand, only willing to let her presence seep into memory. And even before any lie was spoken, before any false story was planted, Paris was already captivated, silently waiting for what would come next. And this is the sensation you must allow yourself to enter now, to walk through those same streets, to feel the lightness of the air, to watch the details of everyday life transformed by the presence of someone impossible to comprehend, and yet impossible to ignore. Imagine yourself sitting on a stone bench, breathing slowly, as the mysterious blonde passes before you, her dress swaying gently, her green eyes capturing fragments of light, and the city, hushed, absorbing her every movement. As the day moved forward, as the cafes filled with murmurs and the sound of bells echoed through the streets, the first appearance of the mysterious blonde became etched in Paris's memory as something beyond the ordinary. No one yet knew that this woman carried with her an entirely constructed life, woven with subtle lies, illusions, and invented stories. But for now, it was only fascination, lightness, and mystery. And it is within this space, between what is seen and what is felt, that we prepare to uncover the true complexity of the story about to unfold. As the days passed, the presence of the mysterious blonde in Paris ceased to be a mere occasional appearance and became a silent phenomenon, almost tangible. What impressed people was not only her beauty, though that alone could have been enough to draw eyes, but the way each gesture, each movement, seemed to carry with it an untold story. There was such a natural delicacy in her posture that those who observed her felt calmed, as if the very city itself began to breathe more slowly. There was no rush in her steps, no haste in the hands that gently touched a railing or adjusted a strand of hair. Everything about her moved in cadence, almost musical, and the invisible melody that followed her presence wrapped everyone around her in its quiet embrace. The blonde's enchantment was not limited to her face or her body, though they were striking. There was something in her voice, low, soft, slightly drawn out, that seemed to whisper ancient, intimate secrets, even when she spoke of ordinary things, the weather, the rhythm of daily life. Those who heard her felt transported to a place beyond the stone streets and the murmur of cafes. She needed no explanations. Her mere presence created an aura of silent understanding, as though each observer could decipher profound thoughts without a single word being spoken. Paris, enthralled, began to sense that there was something special about her, something that defied logic and settled instead in the subtle spaces of imagination. In the bohemian cafes, where artists and intellectuals gathered to discuss poetry, music, and painting, the blonde became an unofficial muse. Painters quickly sketched her into notebooks, striving not only to capture her appearance but the intangible essence that radiated from her every gesture. Writers, their pens gliding slowly across the page, tried to translate the feeling of watching her walk the streets, of seeing her gaze rest on a corner, or hearing her laugh softly in a distant conversation. Her presence inspired, but never allowed itself to be possessed. She remained an enigma, a figure insinuating herself into the collective imagination without ever fully revealing who she was. And there was also the subtle power of her attention. When someone received her gaze, even for a moment, there came a strange sensation that the world itself grew clearer, lighter. It was as if the heaviness of everyday life dissolved in the lightness of her presence. This effortless ability to touch deeply made all of Paris begin to remember her in detail, though no one could claim to have shared a long or intimate conversation with her. Her enchantment resided precisely in that delicate balance between closeness and distance, in the artful game of becoming essential without ever becoming accessible. But behind all that charm, there lingered a subtle feeling of displacement. Attentive eyes noticed that she seemed to belong to another place, another time, and that her seamless blending into the city held something carefully calculated, though gently veiled. Each smile, each gesture, each movement along silent corridors or adorned squares carried a perfection almost too flawless to be real. This small detail, barely perceptible, planted the first seeds of doubt. There was something about this woman that went beyond chance, as though her life itself had been carefully crafted so that Paris would believe in her existence completely. As she wandered the narrow streets, passed through markets where stalls were beginning to open, and by the river where boats drifted lazily across the water, the blonde became more than a woman. She became a collective experience. Each passerby carried with them the memory of her presence, the sensation of her lightness and charm, and the certainty, vague but undeniable, that there was more to her than could ever be explained by logic or curiosity. It is in this space between fascination and doubt that the story deepens. For the blonde's enchantment was not merely superficial. It was the doorway to an entire life woven of illusions, carefully planned, a web that would grow ever more complex as Paris allowed itself to be drawn into her silent magnetism. And as you listen to this story, let yourself feel the same effect. The gentle weight of curiosity, the lightness of mystery, the calm, almost hypnotic stillness of watching someone who seems impossible to understand, yet unforgettable. And so, without realizing it, the whole city prepared to be wrapped in a delicate web of fascination, charm, and eventually deception. Each step of the mysterious blonde was a silent invitation to look closer, to admire, to question, and to let the mystery settle quietly into the daily life of Paris, like a soft breath that transforms the ordinary into the extraordinary. As Paris moved to the quiet rhythm of its lazy mornings and afternoons gently lit by the sun, the mysterious blonde began to circulate more often among the cafés and ateliers of the city. These places, haunts of artists, writers, and musicians, were by nature spaces of observation and contemplation, where every detail of daily life could be transformed into inspiration. And it was there, among unfinished canvases, yellowed sheets of music, and sketchbooks filled with hurried lines, that her presence became something more than visible. It became a silent phenomenon, almost ethereal. The artists were enchanted not only by her appearance, but by the way she seemed to float through spaces, touching them with delicacy without ever disturbing their harmony. Painters sketched her with pencil and charcoal, striving to capture the light that danced in her hair and the serenity of her gestures, yet quickly realized that nothing could reproduce the essence that radiated from her presence. Writers, sitting at worn wooden tables, tried to translate the sensation of watching her pass by, the silent weight of her attention, the almost palpable mystery that hovered around her. Every description, every attempt to fix her image onto paper felt insufficient, and that insufficiency only deepened the fascination. There was something magnetic in the way she observed the world. She never imposed herself, never intruded. Yet when she spoke, her soft voice transformed ordinary conversations into small, unforgettable moments. A simple remark about the evening light or the movement of leaves was enough to still the worries of those around her and draw them into the quiet contemplation she inspired. Her attention was both a rare gift and a delicate trap. Those who received her gaze felt valued, but also understood that it revealed nothing of her true self. In artistic circles, rumors and small tales began to spread, each more alluring than the last. Some claimed she had been born in a distant palace. Others, that she had traveled across continents unnoticed. There were whispers of secret lovers, or meetings with renowned intellectuals. The truth was impossible to separate from invention, and that ambiguity was precisely what fueled her allure. The more speculation grew, the more her presence became a living narrative, a story to which every artist and café dweller unknowingly contributed. All of Paris was participating, without realizing it, in a collective creation woven of glances and murmurs, though no one could ever touch the reality behind the blonde's mask. What made this phenomenon even more fascinating was her ability to adapt. She slipped effortlessly into different groups, offering fragments of stories carefully chosen, always enough to spark curiosity, never enough to reveal truth. On sunlit afternoons, she might be seen at a corner table, gazing at passers-by, occasionally exchanging a few words with a poet scribbling inspirations, or with a musician tuning his violin, trying to echo the cadence of her steps. Each interaction was delicate, almost imperceptible, yet marked by a subtle elegance that left everyone present aware that something extraordinary was happening, though no one could say exactly what. And as she moved among the bohemians, something began to take shape, a silent network of fascination and admiration. Every person who observed her contributed, without knowing, to the building of a living urban legend, a collective narrative of mystery and enchantment. Paris itself seemed to vibrate to the rhythm of her presence. Cafés filled with eyes that followed her, streets turned into quiet runways, and each of her gestures, however small, was seized and retold as story by those who longed to believe in what they saw. And yet, beneath it all, there remained the sense that something was always out of reach. Even among those who knew her best, who spoke with her most often, there lingered an invisible barrier that prevented true closeness. It was as though every word, every smile, was carefully measured, a nearly invisible choreography that kept everyone fascinated yet unable to touch her essence. This power to captivate without ever yielding was the first layer of the deception that would later reveal itself, when Paris would discover that her seemingly perfect life was, in truth, a meticulous construction of stories and appearances. And it is into this slow, almost hypnotic rhythm that you, too, must allow yourself to enter, walking alongside the cafés and ateliers, breathing in the faint perfume of freshly brewed coffee, hearing the distant murmur of conversations, and letting the presence of the mysterious blonde settle in your mind like a delicate thread of fascination. Here, among whispers and watchful eyes, the city prepared itself to be gradually wrapped in the web of illusions that would transform the lives of all who crossed the path of this woman. Unique, mysterious, almost unreal. Amid the soft light of Parisian afternoons and the continuous murmur of the Seine, something began to change. The mysterious blonde, who until then had limited herself to enchanting with gestures, glances, and silent presences, took the first step toward something subtler yet decisive. The first lie. It was not a grand, dramatic, or blatant falsehood, but rather a carefully chosen detail, almost imperceptible, that would begin to weave the web sustaining her fabricated life. Paris, enchanted and unguarded, did not notice the exact moment when reality began to bend, but from that instant on, nothing would be quite as it seemed. The lie appeared as a word spoken in a Montmartre cafe, amid the aroma of roasted coffee and fresh bread. Perhaps it was an answer to an innocent question about her origins or profession, a reply offered with the gentleness of someone merely sharing a fragment of personal history. She mentioned a distant city, a familiar name, or an elegant title that no one could easily verify. The intention was not to deceive cruelly. It was only to plant a seed of fascination, reinforcing the mystery already surrounding her. And, like a delicate gesture, this lie was absorbed by those present as a natural part of her narrative, deepening the charm without arousing suspicion. And it is curious to realize how a first lie has the power to shape perception. A word, a brief story, can transform the way someone is seen by all around them. The blonde seemed to understand this instinctively, or perhaps intuitively, and used every detail of the environment to strengthen the sense of authenticity. Her voice remained soft, almost musical, each syllable chosen to sound casual yet carried by silent precision. Paris, with its habitual gift for being captivated by the extraordinary, accepted the story without question, becoming an unconscious accomplice in an illusion that would spread over the following days, weeks, and months. In cafes, ateliers, and small gatherings of writers and musicians, the narrative of that first lie began to circulate. Each person who heard it added nuances, slight interpretations, fragments of imagination that reinforced the myth. The blonde needed no intervention. Her presence alone was enough for others to interpret, fill in the gaps, and believe in what they wished to see. Thus, with no apparent effort, she built a reputation that seemed solid, elegant, and utterly convincing. Truth and fiction blended so delicately that distinguishing one from the other became almost impossible. The effect of this initial lie was silent yet profound. The city, which until then had observed her with curiosity and fascination, began to develop a sense of familiarity. People believed they knew her, even without ever having shared a long or intimate conversation. Stories about her life, her origins, and her supposed experiences began to flow softly from mouth to mouth, transforming into small urban legends no one dared to question. Each retelling reinforced the illusion, and each new encounter with the blonde added layers to a story that, though false, seemed indisputably real. And even when small contradictions arose, they were easily absorbed by the irresistible charm of the woman. A glance, a smile, a delicate gesture of attention was enough to erase any doubt that might have appeared. Thus, the initial lie, simple and elegant, cleared the path for others, forming a web delicate, invisible, yet remarkably efficient. Paris, unaware, became a willing accomplice in the construction of this imagined life, fascinated and unconscious of being guided by a carefully orchestrated narrative. As the sun sank slowly over the rooftops of the city, illuminating the Seine with soft golden reflections, the mysterious blonde walked among cafes, shops, and squares, her gestures natural, her presence light. The first lie, now absorbed into the collective perception, began to take root as part of the reality Paris believed it knew. And it is at this very point that the spectator must allow themselves to step in, to perceive how something seemingly small and harmless can alter the perception of all, and how magic and deception can walk side by side, unnoticed, when offered with delicacy, elegance, and subtlety. And so, in this calm and introspective rhythm, the first layer of a false life was planted. A detail that seemed small became the cornerstone of a broader illusion, one that would continue to unfold among the cafes, ateliers, and silent streets of Paris. Allow yourself to feel the lightness of this moment, the softness of the narrative, and the silent tension of realizing that, from a single word, the extraordinary begins to become real, even if nothing is truly what it seems. While Paris continued its silent dance between narrow streets and sunlit cafes, the mysterious blonde began appearing more frequently at the city's social events. Elegant balls, discreet vernissages, candlelit dinners, each space was transformed into a stage for her silent and irresistible presence. And even when she found herself among people who had already heard rumors about her or had taken part in previous encounters, there was always the sense that nothing could be predicted, nothing could be fully understood. She did not need to arrive with fanfare, nor announce her presence. A single glance, a graceful step through the crowd, was enough for all of Paris to feel that something singular was taking place. In the elegant salons, lit by chandeliers that cast dancing shadows across polished floors, the blonde walked lightly, as though floating among the guests. Every gesture was calculated with invisible precision, a movement of her hair, a discreet smile, the gentle touch of a hand when greeting someone. Nothing seemed forced, yet everything carried the silent intention of impressing, of being remembered, of becoming unforgettable. Paris, fascinated, accepted each detail as natural, while the stories and rumors surrounding her life began to solidify. The first lie, once subtle, now multiplied and took shape, molded by the perceptions and interpretations of each observer. Conversations became the stage for her narrative. When she spoke, her words were carefully chosen, soft and elegant, yet always enough to hint at important connections, intriguing stories, sophisticated experiences that no one could confirm. It did not matter whether they were true or invented. The effect was the same. Each person present felt transported into a world of elegance and mystery, as if Paris itself had leaned in to listen to her stories with quiet reverence. And even the most skeptical found themselves touched by the magnetism of her presence, by the sensation that, in that moment, something extraordinary was unfolding, though no one could define exactly what. At balls and vernissages, she seemed to choose her moments with almost imperceptible care. A glance at an artist, a smile for a musician, a discreet nod to someone who had mentioned her name with curiosity. Each gesture wove, slowly, a web of fascination that captured everyone around her. There was no rush, no need for ostentation. All of Paris allowed itself to be enveloped by the silent enchantment she emanated. Each event became an opportunity to reinforce the illusion, to consolidate the impression that her life was flawless, brimming with connections and experiences that seemed endless. And yet, there was something almost imperceptible, that a few more attentive observers began to notice. Small incongruities emerged between the stories she told and the details of reality. A reference to a place that did not exist, a suggestion of friendship with someone who had never been seen. Tiny clues that escaped most, but that quietly created a sense of strangeness for those willing to pay attention. Paris, enthralled, ignored most of these nuances, but these subtle fissures began to outline the complexity of the life the blonde was so carefully constructing. As guests moved about the salons, sipping delicate wines and discussing works of art, the blonde remained a figure of serenity and mystery. Each person who observed her felt the lightness of her charm, yet no one was certain how deep, or how true, her story really was. It was a silent dance of perceptions and illusions, where every gesture was watched, every word etched into memory, and every encounter served to strengthen the carefully woven narrative. And it is into this setting that the spectator should allow themselves to enter, to imagine chandeliers casting golden reflections over elegant gowns and tailored suits, to hear the soft murmur of conversations, to sense the aroma of wine and the delicate perfume that seemed to follow her. It is in this space that fascination blends with doubt, and the mysterious blonde begins transforming the life of Paris into a living work of art, filled with charm, mystery, and stories not yet confirmed, but already enchanting, binding, and hypnotizing everyone who crossed her path. As night slowly descended over the city's rooftops, and the streets glowed with the amber light of lampposts, the blonde slipped away almost unnoticed, leaving behind whispers, remembered glances, and the sensation that something extraordinary had just occurred. And it is in this silence after her disappearance that Paris prepared itself for the next layer of the plot. The moment when the invented stories and subtle charms would begin to turn into the very reality everyone believed they knew. With the quiet charm of her appearances in salons and cafes, the mysterious blonde began to explore another way of existing, through writing. Letters, notes, and secret messages became the extension of her presence. Delicate tools that allowed her to touch lives at a distance, without ever fully revealing herself. The paper, carefully chosen, the faint fragrance of fresh ink, the handwriting, almost musical, all of it turned each message into a sensory spell, a little enchantment that captured not only the eyes but also the heart of whoever received it. Paris, and even places beyond her borders, soon grew fascinated not only by what she was in person, but by what her words suggested, hinted, and promised. Her letters were woven with obsessive care. Every word, every pause, every small curve of a letter carried intention. They were never just communication. They were fragments of a larger story, threads of a delicate web of mystery and closeness. A poet, upon reading a note, felt as though the words floated in the air like music, echoing his own emotions and deepening his sense of connection to this woman he could never truly explain. A musician, opening a letter, found new melodies awakening in his soul, harmonies that had slept until her handwriting breathed life into them. Each correspondence was a portal, a door opening into the imagined world of the blonde, a silent invitation to believe in her shimmering, invented life. The contents shifted according to the reader, yet always held a subtle rhythm, whispered suggestions of grand connections, hints of elegance, the shadow of an intriguing past that seemed out of reach. She wrote of chance encounters with influential figures, of journeys to distant lands, of experiences that, though improbable, felt strangely plausible within the aura she had so carefully created. And each reader, in opening a letter, felt they were entering a secret, an intimacy rare and rarefied, one that bound them closer to her, deepening the spell. But her correspondence had another, quieter effect. Slowly, it began to mold the collective story of who she was. Every letter that was passed on, every note read aloud in whispers, became a fragment of the larger myth, a fragment that merged with rumors, with sightings, with cafe conversations. Fact and invention blurred, until no one could say with certainty where one ended and the other began. Each recipient, unknowingly, became her accomplice, helping to weave the illusion into something that resembled truth. Even the way she sent these letters was deliberate, a ritual in itself. At times they arrived quietly, in plain envelopes slipped into discreet addresses, as if the city itself wished to guard her secret. Other times they appeared at glittering social gatherings, delivered by careful hands, reinforcing the idea that her life was stitched with elegance and influence, detail and design. Each delivery was a performance, a reminder that she could be everywhere and nowhere at once. Impeccable, untouchable, endlessly fascinating. The letters gave her powers that presence alone could never grant. In ink she could invent friendships that never existed, speak of encounters that had never occurred. Each written line expanded her web, feeding the illusion of authenticity and extending her invisible reach. And those who received her words, those who pressed the paper to their chest or reread the lines in candlelight, believed themselves chosen, entrusted with something rare, when in truth they were only actors in her silent play. Meanwhile, the city kept its rhythm, slow, golden at dusk, its rooftops bathed in caramel light. And in that glow, she remained both absent and present, unseen yet everywhere, her letters carrying not only words but the touch of an ingenious mind, the whisper of a hidden life built with precision and grace. And so Paris grew accustomed to this invisible nearness. Each letter became proof that she existed not only in flesh and appearance, but also as a subtle presence, as a story slipping across borders and into hearts. The city, lulled and enchanted, drifted between what it saw and what it chose to believe, until, almost without noticing, it surrendered itself to the web of illusions the mysterious blonde wove, turning paper, ink, and silence into instruments of fascination, seduction, and quiet deception. As days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, the presence of the mysterious blonde in Paris began to generate a phenomenon almost invisible, yet immensely powerful: rumors. Gentle whispers in cafes, discreet conversations in ateliers, murmurs shared among artists and intellectuals, all wove an invisible network that stretched across the city. Each appearance, each letter, each carefully measured gesture became raw material for stories that, though often imprecise, cemented the idea of a woman who existed as a living icon of mystery and sophistication. Curiously, these rumors were not only invented by those eager to craft tales, but also by those who sincerely believed in the authenticity of her life. A comment about a supposed encounter with a famous poet might be repeated, slightly altered, taking on nuances that reinforced the narrative. An observation about travel to distant cities transformed, in the teller's memory, into a fascinating and exotic journey, perfectly fitting the image of the woman everyone longed to know. Each whisper became a thread in a collective tapestry, woven from curiosity, admiration, and often innocence. In the quiet cafes, where the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the scent of old books and sketchbooks, she was spoken of with a reverence almost ritualistic. "Did you see her last night?" someone would ask, voice low, almost fearful of interrupting the spell. "She was at the dinner on Rue Saint-Honoré. They say she spoke with a renowned critic, and no one knew her true story." And so, without any need for verification, each detail solidified in the collective imagination. The whispers did more than reinforce her presence. They magnified fascination and deepened the mystery, transforming her into a figure who existed simultaneously in reality and in the stories Paris told itself about her. Among artists, writers, and musicians, the circulation of rumors acted as silent fuel for enchantment. Painters tried to capture her essence on canvas, often failing to reproduce reality, but always conveying something unforgettable. Writers incorporated imagined encounters and tales into stories and poems, blending fact, fiction, and imagination into a mixture that felt as plausible as it was alluring. Each rumor, then, not only reinforced the perception of the mysterious blonde, but became part of Paris itself, shaping how the city saw her and interpreted her existence. And it was in this delicate space between reality and invention that she moved with mastery. She never needed to correct the stories, confirm them, or deny any detail. She allowed the collective imagination to do her work. A simple gesture, a discreet smile, or a casual mention of an event that never happened was enough to turn a rumor into perceived truth. Paris, enchanted, became a silent accomplice to its own illusion, absorbing each narrative and layering it with personal interpretations, weaving a complex web of perceptions that heightened her allure without ever revealing the truth. The power of these whispers also acted as an invisible barrier. The more the stories spread, the harder it became for any observer to distinguish reality from imagination. Small inconsistencies were easily forgotten or reinterpreted, adjusted by the selective memory of each witness. In this way, the woman could sustain multiple versions of her life simultaneously, each plausible, each fascinating, each contributing to the mystery that seemed to hover permanently over Paris. And it is in this almost hypnotic rhythm that the listener of this story should allow themselves to enter, to hear the silent murmurs drifting through the streets, to feel the soft warmth of the sun on the rooftops, to imagine the distant sound of hurried footsteps and the gentle music spilling from open windows. Between whispers and glances, the mysterious blonde becomes ever more real in the mind of Paris, even though, in reality, her entire life is being meticulously constructed from subtle deceptions and delicate illusions. As night falls over the city, and the air fills with the scent of flowers and slowly cooling coffee, the rumors continue their silent work. They transform each appearance, each gesture, and each letter into something larger than the woman could achieve alone. All of Paris becomes part of building the illusion, enveloped in a narrative of fascination, curiosity, and admiration, laying the groundwork for the mysterious blonde to reveal even more intricate layers of her invented life, with details no one could ever suspect. Like any delicate web, the carefully constructed life of the mysterious blonde could not remain intact forever. Subtly and almost inevitably, the first scandal emerged. Nothing explosive or overtly dramatic, what occurred was a small fissure in collective perception, a detail that began to awaken doubt amid so many fascinated gazes. Perhaps it was a contradictory comment at an elegant dinner, a lost letter suggesting something that didn't fit, or an observation from someone who knew the city better than she imagined. The point was that, suddenly, the perfect image began to show its first imperfections. The scandal started slowly, with discreet murmurs among cafe and salon-goers. "Did you hear what they said about her?" someone would ask, in a low tone, almost afraid to disturb the magic of the moment. The whispers grew as minor inconsistencies were noticed. Dates that didn't match, events that seemed improbable, relationships mentioned that no one could confirm. For most, these were minor details, easily smoothed over by the woman's elegance and charm. But for some, a subtle sense that something was amiss began to settle in, opening cracks in the flawless image that had surrounded the blonde until then. Despite all the attention, despite the silent allure enveloping each gesture, the first scandal brought a slight unease. Paris, accustomed to admiring and believing in the woman's almost supernatural aura, suddenly felt a moment of hesitation. Some artists revisited sketches and drawings, searching for inconsistencies that had previously gone unnoticed. Writers began rereading letters and accounts, looking for subtle signs that the narrative might not match reality. Yet, for the majority, fascination remained unchanged. There was something so compelling about her presence, so hypnotic in her voice and gaze, that even the faintest doubts were quickly neutralized. Paradoxically, the effect of the first scandal heightened the mystery. People began to discuss her more, creating hypotheses and additional stories, inadvertently reinforcing the web of illusions. Each rumor and speculation added layers to the existing narrative, making the mysterious blonde even more unforgettable. Even those who noticed small contradictions or improbable details felt drawn to the complexity of the situation, unable to resist the silent seduction of someone who could, without apparent effort, manipulate perceptions with the elegance of an artist. The first scandal also brought a new dimension to her interactions. She seemed to perceive, subtly, the doubts that arose, using them as part of her silent strategy. A discreet smile, a delicate gesture, a carefully delivered letter with a precisely chosen word, everything became reinforcement of the narrative, keeping the illusion alive while incorporating minor inconsistencies as natural elements of her personality. The city learned to coexist with the mystery, understanding that perfection is never complete, yet enchantment persists even amid flaws. At the heart of this silent scandal, the observer should sense something profound, fragility and strength coexisting simultaneously. Each planted doubt was also an opportunity for fascination. Each small flaw became part of constructing a more intricate story. Paris, even when suspicious at times, continued to admire the blonde, absorbing the contrast between mystery and reality with a mixture of wonder and silent acceptance. As day gave way to night, and the city's amber lights reflected softly on the Seine, the mysterious blonde remained present, seemingly untouched by the scandal. Conversations in cafes and salons continued, now more careful, more curious, more intense. And even with small cracks in her image, Paris remained enchanted, for the scandal did not diminish her allure. It merely added an extra layer of complexity to the unfolding story, preparing the ground for future lies and appearances to have even greater impact. It is in this delicate balance between doubt and fascination that the narrative becomes irresistible, allowing the observer to feel the silent tension, the beauty of the mystery, and the inevitability that, even amid small ruptures, the web of the mysterious blonde would continue to expand, seducing all who crossed her path with the almost hypnotic calm of someone who knows exactly how to remain unforgettable. With the first scandal discreetly absorbed by Paris, the mysterious blonde advanced in an even subtler and more calculated manner. If small inconsistencies had appeared before, now every word, every gesture, and every letter became an active piece in the construction of an increasingly complex web of lies. She did not merely enchant, she manipulated perceptions with the delicacy of a watercolor painter, soft strokes that, when combined, created images impossible to distinguish between reality and invention. Each rumor, each correspondence, each appearance was carefully adjusted, ensuring that the entire city remained fascinated, even as the truth became invisible. The expansion of this web began in the spaces that were already her territories of influence. Bohemian cafes, elegant salons, and quiet ateliers where artists and writers discussed ideas and drew inspiration from one another. There, every gesture, every whispered word was absorbed and reinterpreted by attentive observers, transforming into stories of their own. She needed to do nothing extraordinary. Merely being present was enough for all of Paris to participate in the creation of her living legend. And as new details were added, small lies intertwined with previous ones, forming an almost perfect network of perception and illusion. The blonde began introducing more complex elements into her narrative. Claims of travels to exotic cities, encounters with influential personalities, and experiences that no one could confirm were casually dropped in conversations or subtly conveyed through letters. Each new piece of information was absorbed by the collective imagination, taking on a life of its own as it was repeated, commented on, and reinterpreted. Paris, fascinated and enchanted, accepted these stories as part of its reality, never questioning the source or their veracity. The line between truth and invention grew ever thinner, and the woman remained at the center of a network that strengthened with every glance, every sigh, and every conversation about her. There was also the subtlety of perception. Minor fissures or contradictions were skillfully transformed into nuances of personality, details that reinforced the image of complexity and sophistication. A perceived error here or there did not diminish her charm. On the contrary, it added authenticity to the carefully constructed life. Paris believed it knew the woman, but in reality, it knew only the stories she allowed to reach it. Each individual became, without realizing it, complicit in maintaining and expanding the illusion, feeding the collective fascination that kept the blonde at the center of attention and imagination. As the web expanded, her control over the narrative grew. The blonde could direct rumors, suggest encounters, and manipulate perceptions with a single gesture or phrase, without needing to intervene directly. All of Paris became an invisible stage, where fiction transformed into perceived reality, and where every observer contributed, consciously or not, to the construction of a life that existed more in the collective imagination than in concrete reality. This ability to coordinate others' perceptions with apparent effortlessness made her power silent and nearly absolute. Thus, each letter, each smile, each glance, Each appearance became part of a larger mechanism. The woman did not merely deceive, she transformed the entire city into participants in her own fiction. Fascination grew, rumors multiplied, and the invented stories solidified as perceived truth. Paris, enchanted and seduced by the mystery, did not realize that each carefully calculated detail reinforced the complexity of the web the blonde was constructing, preparing the ground for even greater deceptions, more sophisticated encounters, and a narrative that would become nearly impossible to unravel. It is at this silent, almost hypnotic point that the observer should allow themselves to enter, to perceive how the combination of charm, mystery, and small lies creates an invisible web that envelopes everyone, quietly, without haste. It is the beauty of deception and shared perception, where reality bends before the collective imagination, and where the mysterious blonde remains, increasingly central, increasingly fascinating, while all of Paris becomes complicit in a story that, though invented, seems utterly real. As the web of lies expanded, the mysterious blonde began to exercise a subtle type of influence over Paris that went beyond mere aesthetic or social fascination. It was not just her ability to appear in salons and cafes, send intriguing letters, or fuel rumors. There was something deeper, almost imperceptible, that made her presence decisive in artistic, intellectual, and social circles. Every gesture, every comment, every appearance was absorbed and reverberated, shaping behaviors and decisions, suggesting directions, guiding perceptions, and silently building a network of power that no one dared to question. The influence began subtly. A comment about an emerging painter, made in a cafe filled with artists, could transform someone's reputation overnight. A discreet reference to an up-and-coming writer, or a gently insinuated opinion about a musician, was enough to alter the course of careers and reputations. Nothing was imposed aggressively. Everything moved like a soft breeze, guiding the city in the direction the blonde desired. Paris, enchanted and unaware, participated in its own manipulation, absorbing the signals and reinforcing the illusion of authenticity she carefully maintained. At dinners and vernissages, she consolidated her social power with the same naturalness with which she floated through events. Her voice was calm, yet carried implicit persuasion, her gaze, silent, yet capable of creating instant connections. Every compliment, every gesture of attention, every conversation led the city to perceive that the mysterious blonde was not just a charming presence, but someone whose opinions and choices carried real weight. Even those who suspected minor inconsistencies were irresistibly drawn to the magnetism she radiated, recognizing, without meaning to, the silent power she wielded over everyone. The influence was not limited to individuals. Small groups began adjusting decisions, behaviors, and priorities based on her gestures or words. An atelier might reorganize an exhibition following a comment from her. A cafe might welcome new clients or artists she suggested. Her carefully constructed, invented life became the invisible standard by which Paris oriented itself, and the entire city began to sense, even without naming it, that her presence influenced directions, decisions, and choices that appeared spontaneous but were subtly shaped by her narrative. And there was also the art of silent charm. She never needed to instruct, command, or correct. A smile at the right moment, a letter sent with a delicately chosen observation, or even the decision not to appear at an event created waves of effect. All of Paris responded, adjusting, projecting admiration and trust onto her, while in truth, every action was part of an intricate plan of perception. The blonde's life thus became not merely a personal illusion, but a mechanism of cultural and social influence, where every detail was carefully orchestrated to maintain the city's fascination and adherence. Within artistic and intellectual circles, this influence began to be perceived as almost mythical. Comments about her style, intelligence, and knowledge went beyond superficial praise. They shaped opinions, generated trends, and molded perceptions of value. Paris, even unconsciously, began to measure events, people, and ideas by indirect reference to the blonde, establishing a hierarchy of fascination that reinforced her position invisibly. Her fabricated life, more than invented stories, became a benchmark for the city's own perceived reality. Yet, all this influence was maintained with an almost hypnotic calm. There was no rush, no urgency, only the delicacy of someone who understands that silent power endures longer than any overt display. Every gesture, every letter, every salon appearance reinforced the idea that the mysterious blonde not only existed but subtly and elegantly commanded the flow of admiration, opinions, and decisions around her. Paris, captivated, became complicit and part of this invisible choreography, enchanted by a woman whose life, though invented, wielded real power over all who surrounded her. It is at this moment of almost hypnotic contemplation that the observer should allow themselves to enter, to perceive the silent force of fascination, the ease with which illusion transforms into influence, and the complexity of a fabricated life that paradoxically shapes the reality of an entire city. The mysterious blonde does not merely deceive. She conquers, guides, and inspires, all with the almost imperceptible subtlety of a wind stirring the leaves, while all of Paris continues to believe, without question, in the charming perfection of her presence. Even in the subtlety of her hypnotic presence, even in the silent elegance that enchanted Paris, small cracks began to appear. The mysterious blonde, despite her near-total control over perceptions, began to encounter something inevitable: discreet enemies and subtle suspicions. They were not dramatic antagonists or declared villains. They were individuals who, through curiosity, careful observation, or prior experience, started noticing small inconsistencies in her carefully constructed narrative. Minor details that went unnoticed by most now drew the attention of those few who could not be swayed by charm alone. The suspicions emerged as faint murmurs, almost imperceptible, spreading through the corridors of salons, the corners of cafes, and the pages of confidential letters. "Did you notice something strange about her?" someone would whisper, fearing to offend the group or disrupt the aura of fascination. Over time, these murmurs multiplied, forming a silent shadow over the woman's impeccable image. Small lapses in memory, contradictory dates, or references to non-existent people began to be noted. The city, captivated and enchanted, still believed, but now there was a layer of doubt, subtle, almost invisible, yet real. The emergence of these discrete enemies and suspicions was not merely an obstacle. It was also an unexpectedly useful element. The blonde, intuitive, understood that doubt could be manipulated, that uncertainty could reinforce the mystery and heighten fascination. A discreet comment about something questioned, a letter sent in response to a subtle inquiry, or even strategically timed silence transformed suspicion into a tool of control. Paris began to sense that not everything could be fully understood, and this mystery reinforced the nearly hypnotic power the woman wielded over everyone around her. These discreet enemies sought no open confrontation. Their suspicions were silent, cautious, observant. They attempted to track dates, reconstruct encounters, and compare accounts. Some wrote secret notes, others spoke in low voices, testing coherence, seeking evidence. Yet the blonde, with her silent skill, maintained a fluid narrative, adjusted details, and introduced small innovations into her story, continuing to enchant while deflecting suspicion. Every attempt at scrutiny was subtly absorbed, manipulated, and transformed into a new layer of fascination. Even in the face of these first cracks, her presence remained magnetic. Every gesture, every smile, every glance seemed to defy skepticism. Those who harbored doubts struggled to separate reality from illusion, resisting the silent and elegant charm she exerted. Paradoxically, these early suspicions ended up reinforcing the mystery. The more people sought the truth, the more complex and fascinating she appeared. All of Paris became complicit, consciously or unconsciously, in this delicate game of deception and perception. It is noteworthy that, even as these doubts arose, the city did not cease to admire her. On the contrary, her aura of sophistication and mystery intensified. Some of those who suspected were drawn once again into her charm, unable to resist the combination of elegance, intelligence, and subtlety. Suspicion, rather than destroying the illusion, made it more resilient. Small enemies and questioning functioned like mirrors, reflecting the complexity of her persona and making her story all the more captivating. And in this almost hypnotic rhythm, the observer should allow themselves to enter, to feel the silent tension between charm and doubt, between fascination and suspicion, to perceive that the mysterious blonde, even when surrounded by questioning, maintains control, transforming every minor investigation into an opportunity to reinforce her narrative. Paris, immersed in its own curiosity and admiration, continues to participate in this construction of illusions, allowing the woman to remain not only the central figure of mystery, but also the subtle architect of perceptions, capable of turning any suspicion into another thread in the complex web that invisibly binds together her invented life and her silent influence. As the mysterious blonde's influence expanded and her web of lies grew increasingly complex, encounters inevitably arose that carried subtle, yet real, risks. These were not dramatic confrontations, nor explosive clashes. They were delicate moments where curiosity and suspicion intersected, creating instances of silent tension that could threaten her carefully constructed narrative. An interrogative glance, a casual question, an unexpected reference to events that never occurred, each detail held the potential to become a challenge, demanding skill, attention, and an almost imperceptible measure of luck. These encounters manifested in different forms. Some appeared as curious guests at salons, eager to test coherence and authenticity. Others emerged through subtly answered letters, in which indirect questions threatened to expose minor contradictions. Even the rumors and whispers, which had previously functioned as instruments of fascination, could now become weapons when attentive observers attempted to connect the dots and uncover inconsistencies. Each situation required the blonde to act with calm intelligence, maintaining the serenity that had become her signature, while deflecting, adjusting, and sometimes transforming danger into yet another element of charm and mystery. There was a delicate game of perception in every encounter. A guest might imply they had heard something about an event that never happened, or mention people who had never met her. In such moments, she needed to respond with lightness, turning a potential error into a plausible narrative. A smile, a pause, or a reference to vague but convincing details were enough to redirect the interlocutor's perception, preserving the enchantment surrounding her presence. Paris, absorbing each gesture and every word, remained fascinated, often unaware of the delicate balance maintained between risk and illusion. There were also encounters outside collective awareness, silent, discreet, yet charged with tension. A conversation in an empty cafe, a casual reference to non-existent information, or even observations made through correspondence could serve as tests of coherence. In these moments, she moved with the lightness of one dancing in the air. Every word, every silence, every gesture was calculated to preserve her narrative while intensifying the mystery around her. She understood that even the most careful attention could be converted into fascination, and that the danger of exposure could become an opportunity to strengthen her position in the mind of Paris. Dangerous encounters also revealed the vulnerability of the system she had created. Small errors, if not corrected with precision, could spread and create fissures in collective perception. Yet the woman possessed a silent skill to absorb and transform these threats into narrative elements. A suspicious comment could be reinterpreted as part of her sophistication. A subtle doubt could be converted into additional fascination, demonstrating that even in the face of risk, her control over others' perception remained absolute. Thus, each interaction became an exercise in balance between the real and the imagined, between suspicion and charm. All of Paris participated in this silent dance, often without realizing it, shaping the narrative alongside her and reinforcing the sense that the mysterious blonde existed simultaneously on multiple levels. As a woman, as a story, and as a myth. Each dangerous encounter became another layer of complexity, adding subtle tension and reinforcing the magnetism that kept her at the center of the city and the collective imagination. As the city moved slowly under the golden light of dusk, and cafes and salons absorbed murmurs, laughter, and glances, the mysterious blonde continued her silent choreography. Every encounter, every risk, every moment of tension became an opportunity to reinforce her invented life, expand her web of influence, and intensify the fascination she held over Paris. It is in this delicate space between danger and control that the observer should allow themselves to enter, to feel the almost imperceptible tension, perceive her subtle manipulative skill, and be enveloped by the hypnotic charm of a woman whose life, though full of risks, remains intact, captivating, and absolutely unforgettable. Even the most skillful woman, surrounded by charm and mystery, could not forever escape the weight of her own inventions. The mysterious blonde, whose life had been carefully constructed through letters, rumors, and calculated encounters, began to face moments in which small confessions, whether accidental or strategic, exposed fragments of the truth. These were not dramatic or scandalous revelations, but subtle nuances, words spoken carelessly, gestures that contradicted previously told stories. and gradually, Paris began to realize that the perfection of her narrative might, perhaps, be merely a skillfully maintained facade. The first confessions appeared almost imperceptibly. In conversations with artists or writers, a poorly chosen phrase or a detail about a non-existent trip might slip out, provoking minor shocks of perception. Those who paid attention, curious or suspicious, began to notice inconsistencies and quietly question, is everything we know really true? Yet even in the face of these fissures, fascination remained. The woman's ability to transform each slip into yet another element of mystery allowed any doubt to become part of the enchanting narrative rather than a reason to discredit her entirely. Letters, which had once reinforced the illusion, also began to reveal small contradictions. A note mentioning a meeting in a non-existent location, or an encounter with a fictitious figure, was received and interpreted in multiple ways. Some recognized the incongruity. Others merely sensed the suggestion of something extraordinary, as if doubt added texture to the story rather than destroying it. Thus, even when her lies were partially revealed, the blonde managed to maintain control over the narrative, using each confession as a delicate brushstroke on her canvas of mystery. Consequences of these partial revelations began to emerge socially. Small groups discussed inconsistencies, exchanging impressions in cafes, salons, and ateliers. Some observers began questioning the authenticity of her influence, while others, fascinated by the contrast between truth and illusion, found even greater charm in her complexity. The city, though partially aware of the lies, remained captivated, as if the ability to deceive and fascinate simultaneously were itself an art form. Each confession revealed that the blonde was not merely a social figure. She was a silent strategist, capable of guiding perceptions even on unstable ground. Direct encounters also became spaces of tension and subtlety. When confronted with incisive questions or explicit suspicions, the woman relied on the delicacy of her presence. A smile, a pause, an ambiguous answer, transforming potential threats into opportunities to reinforce mystery. The entire city, absorbing these interactions, was invited to participate in a silent game between perception and reality, between trust and doubt. Each partial confession, each fragment of truth revealed, added layers to her web, making the narrative richer and even more intriguing. There was also a psychological impact to these revelations. Those who suspected or discovered fragments of the truth felt simultaneously deceived and fascinated. The tension between what is known and what is imagined elicited an almost hypnotic attention. Paris, immersed in this space of uncertainty, learned to live with the mystery, to accept that perfection was only a carefully maintained illusion, and to allow itself to be seduced by a woman whose complexity transcended the mere veracity of her life. In the silence of cafes, in discreet conversations in salons, and in the letters that continued to circulate, the mysterious blonde remained central, even if partially unveiled. Each confession revealed both her vulnerability and her brilliance, the ability to turn the partial exposure of lies into a reinforcement of charm and fascination. At this moment, the observer should perceive the delicate balance between deception and seduction, between truth and perception, feeling the silent tension that keeps all of Paris captive while the woman continues to move as the master of her own narrative, combining fragility and power with a hypnotic, almost poetic, grace. With each partial confession, each fragment of truth revealed, the invented life of the mysterious blonde began to face increasing pressure. Paris, fascinated and enveloped by the mystery, remained enchanted, but the accumulated small cracks could no longer be ignored. Discreet enemies and attentive observers began connecting the dots, noticing patterns and inconsistencies, and slowly, the web of perceptions that sustained her narrative began to tighten around her. What had once been a smooth flow of rumors and fascination was now becoming a silent trap, demanding constant skill and attention to avoid full exposure. The city, involuntarily, participated in this process. Every cafe, every salon, every letter became a point of observation and speculation. Murmurs about non-existent encounters, fictitious trips, and imaginary relationships began to circulate with a different weight, denser, heavier with questions. Small doubts multiplied, and those who had previously merely admired now began to interrogate, analyze, and challenge, subtly and almost ritualistically. Paris remained enchanted, but the fascination was now mingled with the silent tension of realizing that perhaps nothing was exactly as it seemed. The blonde, intuitive, noticed every movement, every suspicious glance, every indirect question. She adjusted her narrative with an almost hypnotic delicacy, turning threats into opportunities, contradictions into elements of charm, suspicions into new threads of mystery. Yet, even with this extraordinary skill, the feeling that the web was closing in around her was inevitable. Every gesture, every letter, every encounter required calculation, attention, and patience. Any slip could become public, any detail could be used against her. The carefully cultivated perfection began to show signs of fragility. Encounters with the more perceptive individuals became delicate scenarios, where each word carried multiple meanings and each silence concealed hidden significance. Questions about dates, places, or fictitious people were met with the softness of a smile or the ambiguity of an elegant response. The risk existed, but the woman transformed danger into part of her charm, maintaining control almost imperceptibly. Even in the face of growing tension, Paris continued to marvel, absorbing the balance between suspicion and fascination, doubt and admiration, as if watching an invisible theater where the protagonist moved with almost supernatural grace. Meanwhile, rumors and letters continued to circulate, but now with a different intensity. Small signs of contradiction or incoherence were shared with heightened attention, examined carefully, and commented upon in quieter, almost reverent tones. The social network that had once functioned as support and a tool of charm now began to feel like a silent prison. The woman, master of illusion, needed to remain vigilant, always calculating the impact of each gesture, each appearance, each word. The city, fascinated, became complicit, keeping the mystery alive, yet also contributing to the tightening of this delicate web, which slowly threatened to envelop its very creator. And, in this moment of silent tension, one can perceive the duality of her existence. Simultaneously vulnerable and powerful, fragile and masterful. The web that sustained her invented life no longer merely protected her. It now became a constant challenge, demanding care, attention, and absolute control. Every observer, every rumor, every encounter added layers to the complexity, making confrontation with her own ability to maintain the illusion inevitable. It is in this almost hypnotic space of tension and enchantment that the observer should allow themselves to enter, to feel the delicacy of the web tightening, to perceive the silent intelligence that transforms every risk into fascination, and to understand that even when surrounded by her own network, the mysterious blonde maintains her magnetism. All of Paris, enchanted and unconscious, continues to participate in this dance of perceptions, while the woman balances between exposure and control, master of her narrative, silently challenging both the fragility and the power of her own invention. After years of silent fascination and elegant manipulation, the invented life of the mysterious blonde began to face the inevitability of public judgment. What had once been discreet rumors, whispers in cafes, or cautious observations in salons, transformed into more open discussions, where the entire city seemed, almost hypnotically, to pay attention to every detail of her narrative. Paris, fascinated, curious, and admiring, now watched the woman who had enchanted so many, not only as a spectator but as an unwitting participant in a collective process of questioning, deliberation, and evaluation. The judgment did not manifest in formal courts or official chambers, but in the social fabric of the city, in ateliers, cafes, and streets bathed in the soft yellow glow of evening lamps. Group conversations, exchanged glances, and carefully read letters began to focus on specific aspects of her life. Dates, encounters, claims of trips, and non-existent relationships were examined, questioned, and confronted. Even those who still admired the woman could not help but feel a quiet unease, an almost imperceptible tension that spread like a shadow across the charming environment that had once seemed unquestionable. And, as always, the mysterious blonde faced all this with an almost hypnotic calm. Every word spoken in her defense, every gesture of elegance, every ambiguous response turned the judgment into yet another stage for her subtle control. She did not need to shout or defend herself aggressively. Her presence, her nuances, and her ability to manipulate perceptions were enough to create an aura of mystery that bewildered those who observed her. Even the most attentive, those questioning the truth of her narrative, found themselves drawn to the silent magnetism that remained intact, even amidst growing suspicion. The city, in turn, became both accomplice and judge. Each person participating in discussions about her invented life contributed to the construction of an invisible tribunal, where judgments were made not on evidence, but on perceptions, feelings, and intuitions. The enchantment she exerted over everyone created a constant ambiguity. If her lies were discovered, they were paradoxically reinterpreted as signs of sophistication, intelligence, and subtle manipulative skill. Paris slowly learned to coexist with the tension between reality and illusion, between doubt and admiration. Within this silent tribunal, moments of subtle confrontation emerged. Direct questions, references to non-existent events, or mentions of fictitious people demanded carefully calculated, almost choreographed responses, where each gesture, pause, and smile carried meaning. The woman, master of illusion, transformed any potential exposure into an element of charm, turning public judgment into not only a risk but an opportunity to reinforce her magnetism. The entire city watched, fascinated, recognizing that even under scrutiny, she continued to control the narrative, moving with lightness and precision between suspicion and allure. Even those who were most critical or skeptical found themselves quietly compelled to admire her skill in managing collective perception. Suspicions, whispers, and challenges did not destroy the fascination. They only added depth to the complexity of her persona. Every observer, consciously or unconsciously, became complicit in maintaining her myth, participating in the judgment while remaining enchanted by the mystery she had constructed with years of patience, delicacy, and near absolute control. And it is in this delicate balance between exposure and fascination that the observer should allow themselves to enter, to feel the silent tension of judgment, to perceive how an invented life can become a collective spectacle, and to understand how the ability to control perceptions transforms every threat into fascination. The entire city of Paris, with its attentive eyes and discreet whispers, remains captivated, while the mysterious blonde, even under judgment, continues to move with grace, maintaining her silent power, and demonstrating that the magic of her narrative lies not only in the lie itself, but in her ability to transform any doubt into almost hypnotic enchantment. Even the most carefully constructed life, full of charm, subtlety, and mystery, carries with it the inevitable risk of exposure. For the mysterious blonde, who had enchanted all of Paris with her elegance and skill in manipulating perceptions, the unmasking began as unexpectedly as it was silent. There were no shouts, no dramatic confrontations, only details, small signs that had gone unnoticed, began to emerge, connecting points that had once seemed isolated. Gradually, the veil of mystery started to lift, revealing layers of truth that contrasted with the invented life she had sustained for so long. The process of exposure was not immediate. It began with discreet murmurs, old letters revisited, dates that did not match, meetings that had never occurred. Some observers, driven by curiosity and skepticism, began to notice patterns, ask more direct questions, and confront accounts. Small groups of artists, writers, and intellectuals started to discuss among themselves, attempting to reconstruct the true narrative behind the woman everyone knew and admired. The fascination remained, but it was now mingled with an almost imperceptible tension. A sense that the blonde's enchanting perfection might not be as absolute as it seemed. When the first significant inconsistency was finally perceived publicly, the effect was almost hypnotic. Paris, accustomed to accepting her narrative with delight, had to reconsider its perceptions. Some felt disappointment, others renewed fascination. There was something in the woman's skill at maintaining such a complex web of lies that even the unmasking became part of her magnetism. The entire city watched, unknowingly, as enchantment transformed into revelation, and as fragments of her true story emerged, she did not lose control. Curiously, she reinforced her presence with each nuance exposed. The unmasking was silent, but profound. Details of her invented life began to be questioned more intensely. People remembered encounters that never happened, trips that never took place, relationships that never existed. Every small lie unveiled became an element to be absorbed, reinterpreted, or confronted. The woman, with her habitual calm, responded with the delicacy of someone who turns threat into narrative. A smile, an ambiguous explanation, a calculated pause. Each reaction reinforced her ability to continue captivating, even when confronted with the truth. Paradoxically, the unmasking brought a new layer of fascination. Paris, now aware of the inconsistencies, began to admire not only the woman's appearance and charm but her incredible ability to weave illusions so sophisticated that they resisted, even partially, exposure. Those who had once idolized her unquestioningly now found themselves drawn to her intelligence, subtlety, and quiet courage in the face of risk. The enchantment did not disappear. It merely transformed, acquiring more complex nuances, mixing admiration with disbelief, fascination with doubt. The mysterious blonde, even in the face of revelation, remained central in the city's perception. Each detail exposed was, in some way, incorporated into her narrative, becoming part of the myth she herself had created. All of Paris watched, fascinated, realizing that the unmasking did not destroy her but made her even more intriguing. The invented life, though revealed in fragments, continued to exert silent power, because the ability to manipulate perceptions and emotions had become as intrinsic as her very presence. And it is in this almost poetic moment of tension that the observer should allow themselves to enter, to feel the silent weight of revelation, perceive the complexity of a mind capable of maintaining illusions for so long, and observe how even an unexpected unmasking can be transformed into fascination. Paris, with its attentive eyes, continues to be enchanted and to question itself, while the woman, still central, demonstrates that the true power of a narrative lies not merely in truth or falsehood, but in the ability to transform every discovery into a part of an irresistible, almost hypnotic magnetism that keeps all captivated, even in the face of revelation. The unexpected unmasking of the mysterious blonde sent silent yet profound ripples through Paris, drifting like a restless breeze along streets and cafes. Every partially revealed secret, every detail of her invented life exposed, became the subject of discussion and speculation. The city, until then fascinated and complicit in her narrative, now confronted the complexity of a story that was not entirely real. Murmurs, discreet comments, and attentive glances began to fill salons and cafes, as artists, writers, and curious onlookers attempted to reconstruct fragments of the truth, gauging the extent of the deception and the reach of the charm she had wielded for so long. The repercussions were not limited to social perception alone. Friends and acquaintances, who had once absorbed every word and gesture of the woman with quiet admiration, now sought to understand the exact nature of the lies. Some felt betrayed, others intrigued, and many were fascinated by the ingenuity and subtlety with which she had sustained her invented life for years. The revelation of secrets provoked a curious mixture of disappointment and silent respect. Even when confronted with falsehood, it was impossible to ignore the skill and intelligence that had maintained that web of illusions. Letters and correspondence, which had long served as vehicles of charm, now assumed a different role. They were read with heightened attention, analyzed for inconsistencies, for small clues that might reveal the full extent of the lies. And the woman, always strategic, knew how to take advantage of some of this exposure. Certain confessions were transformed into elements of allure, others softened, and some simply left in calculated silence, allowing the city to complete the narrative on its own, weaving in its imagination a version of the truth that remained partially fascinating. Social gatherings became arenas of delicate tension. Inquisitive glances and indirect questions tested her ability to maintain control over collective perception. With each step, she had to measure her words and gestures carefully, turning any potential threat into fascination or mystery. Paris, aware of the contradictions, continued to marvel, not only at superficial charm but at the complexity of her intelligence, the ability to manipulate perceptions, and the skill to sustain such an intricate narrative even when partially exposed. There was also an emotional impact to the repercussions. Those who had trusted blindly, admired, and been enchanted now experienced a silent tension between admiration and disillusionment. Sensing this, the woman used the delicacy of her presence to soften perceptions of exposure. Every smile, every gesture of kindness, and every calculated pause transformed the audience's perception, preserving her magnetism even in the face of revealed secrets. Paris gradually learned to accept that truth was only one layer of the story, and that fascination could persist even when the illusion became partially visible. The repercussions also subtly affected the city itself. The way salons, cafes, and ateliers reacted to the revelations reflected a collective curiosity, a need to understand the extent of the manipulation while simultaneously marveling at it. Every discussion, every letter read, every attentive glance participated in a process of narrative reconstruction. Fragments of truth blended with impressions, assumptions, and continued fascination. Paris, confronted with these exposed truths, discovered that the mysterious blonde remained at the center of its imagination, not merely as a character, but as the silent architect of collective perception. And in this moment of tension and contemplation, the observer should allow themselves to enter, to perceive the delicate balance between exposure and fascination, between disappointment and admiration. Every revealed secret, every repercussion, does not destroy the magic of the narrative but adds depth, complexity, and humanity to the woman who, even partially unmasked, retains her silent power. All of Paris, aware of the lies and exposed secrets, continues to be captivated, demonstrating that, in the end, the magnetism of an invented life lies not only in the perfection of the illusion but in the ability to transform each fragment of truth into an almost hypnotic fascination, keeping everyone enthralled by a story that, though revealed, remains irresistibly enchanting. As secrets were revealed and silent repercussions spread, the invented life of the mysterious blonde began to show signs of fragility. The charm that had once held all of Paris captive started to wane, not abruptly, but like a slow tide eroding the stones along the shore. Every uncovered lie, every exposed detail, and every confirmed suspicion added tension to the delicate balance she had maintained for years. The woman, whose presence had once seemed indestructible, now faced an inevitable reality. The web she had woven herself was beginning to close, not to protect her this time, but to reveal the vulnerability that had always existed beneath the allure. The fall was not a dramatic spectacle, nor a noisy scandal. It was silent, almost imperceptible, felt in the gazes that had once admired her but now measured every gesture. In cafes, artists and writers discussed their discoveries with a mixture of disappointment and fascination, as if watching a work of art slowly unravel within its own layers. The salons, once stages of her elegance and charm, became spaces where small inconsistencies were scrutinized, and every interaction demanded caution, for any misstep could accelerate the collapse of the narrative. The woman perceived the cumulative effect of these revelations. Every opened letter, every comment made about her, and every attentive glance represented growing risks. Her ability to manipulate perceptions, though still extraordinary, now had to contend with the collective resistance forming in the city. The audience that had once passively absorbed her magnetism now observed with a more critical consciousness, evaluating every gesture and word, testing the coherence of her story, and thus silently contributing to the erosion of the illusion. Even amid this mounting tension, the blonde maintained the calm that had defined her throughout her invented life. Every gesture was measured, every smile carefully placed, every pause calculated to preserve an aura of serenity, even as the structure sustaining her narrative began to tremble. The fall, silent and inexorable, demanded from her a mixture of precision and almost hypnotic delicacy. How to balance the revelation of truth with the maintenance of charm, how to turn fragility into fascination, and how to continue existing in the collective imagination even as the perfection of the myth disintegrated. The audience, in turn, experienced a curious blend of emotions. Some felt disappointment, others empathy, and many remained captivated, not only by the woman herself, but by the complexity of the process that had allowed an invented life to remain intact for so long. The entire city seemed to participate in a delicate ritual of observation and judgment, absorbing every detail of the silent fall while reflecting on the human skill of creating convincing illusions, manipulating perceptions, and maintaining control over the collective imagination even in the face of growing challenges. The silent fall also carried an almost poetic dimension, the awareness that every web of illusions, no matter how skillfully constructed, is vulnerable to the subtle forces of collective perception, curiosity, and doubt. Every unveiled fragment of a lie revealed not only the fragility of the narrative, but also the silent strength of intelligence, social skill, and elegance that had sustained the myth for years. The woman, even while facing the partial collapse of her invented life, continued to fascinate, transforming risk into presence and vulnerability into magnetism. And it is in this moment that the observer must allow themselves to contemplate, to feel the tense serenity of the silent fall, to perceive the delicate balance between deception and fascination, between vulnerability and power, and to understand that even in the face of inevitable erosion, the mysterious blonde maintains a hypnotic presence. All of Paris, witnessing the gradual disintegration of the myth, continues to marvel and question, recognizing that the strength of an invented life lies not merely in falsehood or truth, but in the ability to transform fragility into fascination and to remain unforgettable even as perfection slowly unravels before everyone. Now, as we reach the end of the story of the mysterious blonde, we can see that her invented life, full of charm, mystery, and subtle manipulation, left invisible yet profound marks on the city that witnessed it. Paris, even in the face of revelations and exposed lies, could not help but be captivated by the silent intelligence that sustained the narrative for so many years. It is curious to observe how fascination can survive even when the truth is partially revealed. The woman, though unmasked in various ways, remained alive in the collective imagination, not only as a character of her own deeds, but as an architect of emotions, perceptions, and dreams. The legacy she left is not made of monuments or official glory, but of small impressions, memories, glances, and whispers that traverse the salons, cafes, and streets of the city. Every story told about her, every detail mentioned in confidences and letters, reinforces the idea that human impact lies not only in objective truth, but in the ability to touch emotions, create fascination, and transform ordinary interactions into unforgettable experiences. All of Paris became, unknowingly, a collaborator and guardian of this memory. A city that learned to live with a blend of enchantment and doubt, fascination and disbelief, and to appreciate the complexity of a life that challenged collective perception. Reflecting on all this, one also perceives a silent lesson about the fragility and strength of human stories. Every carefully constructed lie, every partially revealed secret, every dangerous encounter or subtle confrontation contributed not only to shaping the image of the woman, but also to the experience of those around her. It is as if the city had learned, through fascination and disillusionment, to appreciate the delicate balance between reality and illusion, and to recognize that the magnetism of a life can reside as much in truth as in the skill of creating memorable perceptions. At this point, it is impossible not to feel an almost hypnotic calm, a serene acceptance of the absurd and the unexpected. The story of the mysterious blonde, so absurd and captivating, serves as a reminder that real life often blends with elements of fiction, and that human experience is built as much on what is true as on what we believe to be so. Paris, even aware of the lies, continues to marvel, showing that the power of a narrative lies not merely in its veracity, but in the ability to transform perceptions, enchant hearts, and endure in collective memory. And now, dear viewer, as the day slowly departs and the city is wrapped in the soft haze of dusk, allow yourself to feel the weight and lightness of this story. Share your impressions below, reflect on how you felt facing this mystery, and the almost hypnotic skill of manipulating perceptions. Leave your like, not just as a gesture of support, but as a way to connect with others who, too, were carried away by the silent charm of this narrative. And if you are not yet subscribed, consider doing so. Here on the Sleeping Truth channel, every story is carefully told so that you can feel, reflect, and perhaps let the real world mingle with the gentleness of dreams. Now, close your eyes. Let this real absurdity vanish into the mist of your dreams. Feel the silent city, the glances, the whispers, and the enchantment that remained, even when the truth was revealed. Breathe slowly, surrender to serenity, and let calmness fill every thought. Paris, the blonde, and her web of illusions remain alive, but only in memory and imagination, as fragments of a world that existed between the thin line of reality and fantasy. Good night.